What if technology was built to empower marginalized communities instead of manage them? Today, we speak to Professor Aaditeshwar Seth of IIT Delhi. Through his initiatives Vaani and CoreStack, he has engaged dozens of grassroots organizations and government agencies across the country and empowered millions of people. Let's get started. Welcome to the Water Data Podcast. Today, we have Professor Aaditeshwar Seth, an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Delhi. Adi, as we call him, is also the co-founder of the social technology enterprise Vaani. He's passionate about building appropriate technologies and participatory tools that can empower marginalized communities to collectivize and voice themselves. Adi is one of those rare people who works across academia, government, and the civil society sector, and his participatory tools have already reached millions of people and over 150 grassroots organizations. He was recently awarded the ACM SIG Social Impact Award for 2022. Welcome to the Water Data Podcast.
Thank you, Veena.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. I mean, we've worked together for a long time, and you've been an inspiration to a lot of us. So I thought let's start with people who obviously may not be familiar with CoreStack. So CoreStack stands for Commoning for Resilience and Equity. Can you tell us a little bit about CoreStack, why you developed it, and why you need to have a tech stack around commons rather than tools which are targeted towards individual farmers or government agencies?
Veena, it's great to be here. I was looking forward to this. So if we think about some of the big reasons, right, why we are in a mess, right, when it comes to the environment, a lot of it is about collective decisions gone wrong. It's about prioritizing private good over public good, individualism over collectivism. So when we think of agriculture also, the unit at which you're exploring and what you're trying to optimize becomes very small. You're basically looking at your farm and you're trying to see what fertilizers you can add and so on. Systems are very deeply interconnected with biodiversity, with water, and all of these are really commons resources, which means that you need to really think of a much larger landscape. So that is really where the idea of the CoreStack comes in, that how do we use data that gets people to think not individually, but with a much broader shared understanding, understand their landscape, understand what's going wrong with it, and then figure out how they can weave
solve
their
own,
solve the problems, right? And weave their individual decisions into this.
So, a lot of the audience have not heard of CoreStack. So can you just describe CoreStack for us? What's the architecture, what it is?
Yeah, right. So the CoreStack as it is right now, we primarily started building it to solve some of these use cases so that around water security largely. But we built it in a very generic way. So the way it stands right now is that we think of it as a 4-layered architecture where at the base we have a lot of different geospatial data sets. So these are things like land use, land cover, canopy density, tree height, surface water presence, seasonal, perennial, and built over time so that you can monitor changes year on year. And on that, we're also adding all sorts of other data sets now on biodiversity and different aspects. So we have data sets at the base. Now, on these data sets, we then want to describe a particular landscape. So the unit that we're going with right now is a micro-watershed. It's a natural unit for hydrology. But of course, right, you can think of a landscape as a village also if that works better. So for that landscape, then you want to really understand what is the system operating in that landscape? Where is it leading to some negative stresses? What is the key problem in that? So can you diagnose that using all these underlying data sets? So the second layer is more like a intelligence layer, although the intelligence is yet to be built in. But right now, it's about capturing dozens of indicators based on these underlying data sets. So
it's like insights to kind of say, okay, there's the raw data and then there's sort of the indicators or insights around
right.
Okay.
Correct. And the third layer is that now you want to make that accessible to people. So this is where we think of tools for different kinds of users. So a tool which is facing like a planner, a government official, or a large civil society organization, so that they can understand what problems different areas are facing. Another product is for community stewards or community resource persons in the village who are on the ground and making plan for communities for water conservation or ecological restoration and so on. right? So for different sets of users, different applications.
So they could be like community resource people or a local barefoot engineer we have in Karnataka, or it could be an NGO partner on the ground.
Correct.
Any one of these could be users of
Could be
these
users.
tools.
Right, exactly. And then the fourth final layer is that the tool should also enable some kind of integration into different funding mechanisms, for example, like government schemes or carbon credits, essentially large programs that might be operating. Because ultimately, to solve many of these issues, you need financing. So, some way to channel the demands or outputs of these tools into those kind of programs.
You're using our language. I was wondering, you're a computer scientist by training. How did you start from computer science and move into this world of geospatial tools and data?
I think of myself as a traveler. I've never, and I love traveling, I love the outdoors. So I think that's what gets into my academic endeavors as well. I mean, even when it comes to technology, we've seen social media, of course, has gotten a bad name today. But when it started, right, and similarly when the internet started, it was all seen as a democratizing force which would enable people to talk to one another, share information freely. Even all of this thinking around the commons kind of comes from that space, that how do we use technology to get people to network and connect with each other and do good things with those connections.
I mean, it's a really fascinating path you've taken, because most techies that we know to get into social enterprises and startups, and that's in the private goods space, very few people take the public goods nonprofit path, and you've chosen to do that. So,
Right.
what was the gap that you saw that made you kind of take that path? I mean, what was not there when you started your journey? And it's a
Yeah.
15-year journey. I should just have said that this is a very long journey.
Yeah, I think it will be 20 years soon, I guess. But this whole idea of looking at the world more from a commons and networking space, I mean, these are just things that I learned along the way. I started out pretty much as a computer scientist. My PhD, when I started working on it, was on optimizing computer networks, on using Wi-Fi networks opportunistically and doing power conservation and those kind of things. But along the way, I started seeing that the same kind of technology could be used in rural areas for internet connectivity. So that kind of got me started with internet connectivity. When I was just finishing up, I fortunately got a grant to start Vaani. So that's when I came back and I joined IIT Delhi and I started Vaani, all around thinking how social media can be taken to rural communities where internet wasn't accessible, and further there are literacy challenges. So that's what got us thinking around using voice-based communication. And the vision that Gramani has still been pursuing is all around enabling communities to be able to voice themselves, share information with each other, use it to strengthen local democracy. And through Gramani's journey, we learned so much. And primarily because day in, day out, we were listening to voices of people when they were talking about their problems, their dreams. And along the way, of course, being rural areas and some of our main pockets of work being in areas like Bihar and Jharkhand, water was always a consistent thing that was coming up. So when we started thinking about the core stack of using, taking some of the more advanced technologies in machine learning, satellite data, and so on, so water security seemed to be the right place to
Entry
start.
point. So
Right.
initially with Gramvani, it was just that people would call and voice their complaints, right? That was the idea, and then it would be taken back to local administration.
Correct. It started out not just for grievance redressal, but that did become one of the primary things. It started out more as a information sharing concept, right? That you want the information. So we had these three terms, that context, completeness, and credibility, as three properties of information. That it should be contextual, so that you can make sense of it. It should relate to your village, your surroundings, and it should also give you a complete picture. But that was one of the ideas, that how do you not just hear one perspective, but you use it as a public sphere for you can understand multiple perspectives. And then, of course, also credible, right? So it's not misinformation. Using it for social accountability came up in work that we started in Jharkhand when we were working closely with Jean Drez and Ritika Khera. So this was way back in 2011 when NREGA was doing very well. It was at its peak, and we were seeing a lot of impact coming up with water assets and so on that people had been creating. But still, there were problems of wage payment delays and so on. Jean's group actually pioneered this kind of an idea that people could call and into these systems that we developed and record grievances. And these grievances would then be taken up by people working in the Narega Sahayata Kendra. And that system just took off like wildfire. Gramani, actually, we did a major pivot at that point. Before that, we were more of a technology organization saying that we'll build tech for nonprofits, to do all this information sharing and everything. But that network took off so widely that the whole organization pivoted. So rather than just working via nonprofits, we started recruiting volunteer networks on the ground. We built our own content moderation team, and that's led to Mobile Vaani, which is now working in several districts across Bihar, Jharkhand, MP, UP, Delhi, NCR. And then many partners are using local chapters of Mobile Vaani.
Is that going to hold government accountable or to enable them to respond? Because there are two slightly different tracks it could go down.
Correct. So this is entirely for the community to hold government accountable. So the way these systems work is that people can call and record issues that they're facing. And after verification, they get published back on the platform so other people can listen to it.
But then who uses that?
Yeah. So now, partly because all this is going on a public platform, it also gets published on a separate website. And then we built a mechanism that volunteers could also forward it to local officials. So then it becomes really powerful because you now have your phone ringing, and on the phone you can hear a voice of somebody from some remote village saying why they did not get their Narega wages, or why the ration shop in their village is not opening regularly and they've not gotten ration. So that really becomes very powerful. So it puts pressure on the authorities to respond, but in a good way, right? So it's not like allegations being raised against the administration, but it's about saying that there is a media system out there which is giving space to such voices. Our team also builds relationships with the block and district officials. So they also start recognizing Mobile Vaani as a legitimate
source
medium,
of information
source
about
of information.
far-flung places.
Right. So that's how I started. And I mean, at that time, this was all pre-internet, before smartphones and everything had caught up. And Mobile Vaani was the source from which newspapers used to pick up breaking news, because it would first get reported on our platform and then regional TV
Then
channels
journalists and TV channels.
Right. They would pick up stuff from there.
Fantastic. So how did you go from there to CoreStack then? What was that journey like? I mean, that sounds like a fantastic enough enterprise by itself.
Yeah.
So what then led to CoreStack?
Yeah, so there were largely two things. One, that while Mobile Vaani was enabling a lot of new knowledge and sharing of information, and also much better access to social entitlements, from a livelihood standpoint, or from transforming the lives of agricultural households predominantly in these areas, it was still a support mechanism. It wasn't the core. When drought hits and your entire crop gets damaged, or a flood comes and you can't do anything about it, like access to markets and access to jobs and so on. So there was always a desire to kind of go one level deeper. And second, basically, this was more coincidental that I got interested in satellite data analysis, and we were trying to do some other projects, not so much about the CoreStack as such. But having the Gramani network out there, access to the field, first-hand understanding from communities what problems they were facing. So basically, we just were connecting the dots. And
so you wanted almost a architecture to respond to all of those things you were hearing.
Correct.
So people were saying we have these problems, but you were now saying, what can I do to respond to that?
Correct.
And that's what led to this.
That's what. Yeah. That's that exactly.
If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe and explore more conversations on the channel. Share this episode with your colleagues, friends, or anyone interested in water and sustainability. And tell us about yourself in the comments. Are you a student, a professional, or just curious about water? Let us know where you're listening from, and if you'd like to suggest a guest or topics for further episodes. So let's talk a little bit about some of the layers that you've developed. I think there's more than 20 now that you've developed. And how do the layers that you've developed sit alongside layers that other people have developed? Do the tools kind of work across your own layers versus others? How does that work? Or is it all only on, is CoreStack only IIT Delhi's layers or other people's?
No, it's definitely not only IIT Delhi's. So the good thing that's happened actually over the years is that the space of geospatial has really matured. So there's some very nice standards that have emerged, and many organizations have started publishing their own data sets in those standards, raster and vector formats, and especially now with AI, even processing many of those, joining them together has become much easier. So I mean, in the CoreStack, we've pulled in layers from all sorts of places, from partner networks like FES, then some government data sets from Bhuvan on geology, aquifers, and so on. Then a lot of stuff that we've developed ourselves was things like land use, land cover. So there's tons of land use, land cover global products. But then when it comes to India, you need something more suited to regional definitions. Like we have Kharif, Rabi, Zaid, agricultural seasons, for example. So things that can reveal at that regional scale. So we needed to do something more customized to the Indian context. So those are also some layers that we developed. When we started building the CoreStack, together with several partners, we actually visited different communities from Rajasthan, Jharkhand, Odisha, MP, and we tried to understand what were they translating to in terms of layers and data points. So we identified, I think, some 81 data points, of which we might be at 50 right now.
Okay.
This is still a way to go. But through these field studies, we felt that those were some critical things to be able to really understand what might be happening.
So the other thing you've done is you've also produced this open watershed registry for the country. So why do you think it was necessary to do that? You basically got all these data layers and then watershed or micro-watershed as a unit of analysis. So why do you feel that was necessary?
So basically, the planning on the ground for watershed development happens at a scale of about 1,000 hectares to 1,500 hectares. It cuts across a couple of villages. So government had released open layers up to the watershed scale, which was still about 10,000 hectares, which was very large for it to be a planning unit in terms of how work was actually done on the ground. So we wanted to go one level deeper. So that's where we brought this in, and that really forms a key unit on which we compute a lot of indicators from underlying data sets.
So now you've got kind of the data sets and you've got the unified units of analysis. And then you also have some standards, good enough existing standards on metadata. Do people share the data with you willingly, or do you go and like scout data sets? How does that part work in assembling?
We do want to have CoreStack eventually more as an infra on which anyone can add data sets and then run them through analysis pipelines that we've developed, or which they can also add their own analysis pipelines. But it's not at that level as yet. So right now, the ingestion is kind of, we do it through our team. We then scout for suitable data sets relevant to the use cases that we're hearing from the ground. So it's a bit curated right now, but we do want to get to the next stage as well.
So we talked about the data layers, how you get them, and then we talked about the units. So now let's talk a little bit about the tools. Of course, you have Know Your Landscape and Commons Connect, and then we have been working at Well Labs with Jaltol as well. So can you walk us through the two tools? How do those work?
Know Your Landscape is a tool more for a planner, right? So it's meant more for desk side, gaining familiarity with a particular area. So it opens up at a tehsil level, and in the tehsil, it outlines all the different micro watersheds. All the dozens of indicators that have been computed are loaded on it. So it lets you mix and match. So you can see that if you want to understand which areas are more drought prone, so it tells you which micro watersheds have droughts in them. And then on those, you can further intersect. Okay, show me those which also are drought prone, but also have a high cropping intensity and are also groundwater stress. So you can keep narrowing it down. You can further intersect it with village units, that if you want to look at planning interventions in more areas which have a climate stress, plus are also socioeconomically stressed. So these villages might be more remote, right? Let's say more than 2 kilometers away from health facilities. It's one dimension of marginality, but it kind of lets you hone down to more marginalized areas. Similarly, you can look at water bodies. That's another entity, that which water bodies have had a decrease in surface water area over the years, consistent decrease. There might be problems of siltation, for example, and you might want to prioritize or at least investigate what's happening there. So Know Your Landscape is meant more for that.
For a planner to kind of absorb the data and then make decisions on essentially allocation of funds.
Correct.
But can you walk us through like a use case of a particular specific planner in a specific state that has used it, for example?
Now, the thing is that the data, you don't want it to be used in a top-down manner for decision-making by one stakeholder. So the best use case of this are multi-actor platforms. So these are platforms that are being set up by groups like Common Ground, and several landscape partners that Common Ground has brought together. Similarly, Consortium for Agroecological Transformations. So what they do is a very interesting activity that at a block level, they try to get different stakeholders together. So somebody from agriculture, somebody from forestry. They also get local NGOs who are working in those areas. They also get representatives from self-help groups working in those areas. And then they do a joint workshop where KYL layers are used. So the idea is that you want to understand the landscape, but you want to do it in a
contextual, participatory way.
Exactly. So there's a PhD student at the University of Manchester, Anuradha Ganpati. So she coined this. She's been working with us in understanding Commons Connect and so on. So she coined this phrase, more participation, less AI. So that really resonates because otherwise, once the data is out there, it can be used in all sorts of ways. It can be used by whoever to do, whatever top down. If they have the decision making power, they might just do it that way. But you specifically want to invent a setting where the data is used in a participatory manner, so you get multiple perspectives and
so it's a little more organic rather than here's a tool, you do this and you do that and you do that. Right. So one concern that everybody always has is with these open data things, and they are fantastic. It's not a critique as such, but how do you sustain this over time? Right? Because people submit these layers and maybe they had a project and then they developed all these layers, but they did it till 2020. What then updates it to 2026? And do things over time start getting old and out of date? And then similarly, to keep up support on Commons Connect and Know Your Landscape, I mean, you've got to have a team forever and ever that's kind of in place. So are there sustainable revenue models around this? And how do you balance the organic, these are all open source, use it as you will ethos versus we need to keep this core team running? And what happens, 10 years from now?
So actually, there's multiple questions in that, right? So one is, the point is absolutely valid that you don't want these data sets, especially time-varying data sets, to be frozen in time. So that's also one reason why we did many things ourselves. These are automated pipelines which are ingesting raw satellite data and then running them through models to come up with like a land use classification, and we can run it each year.
Right.
So that definitely gives us the ability that we will keep generating these data sets. So for many of these, actually, we've tried to do it programmatically wherever possible. It obviously means that we need to have a team in place. Absolutely. So the way a lot of the CoreStack has been built has been through student researchers and faculty colleagues working on the modeling aspects. And then we have set up a Section 8 company, a not-for-profit company called Commons Tech Foundation. That's where we have a team of engineers who are taking the research outputs, and they've built a whole infrastructure.
Suite of tools and infrastructure.
Yeah, the apps and dashboards and infrastructure around it. We also have, at IIT, we also raised funds for server compute. So that's also helping run all of these computations and keep it going. So that brings to this main point that you raised, that it requires funds to have this team and to have the infrastructure. And so how do we sustain that? Honestly, so far, we are entirely grant supported. So we've not thought so much from a business model point of view right now. We wanted to have the CoreStack as a public infrastructure which is open and free to use.
Do you have our episodes running in the background? If you're curious about a technical term that we've used or an acronym we've forgotten to expand, we have on-screen explanations that we offer on video.
So Know Your Landscape was meant more for this desk side kind of planning and doing it in a participatory setting. Commons Connect is an app now. Commons Connect is meant to sit in the hands of somebody from the community, right? So these could be community resource persons working with NGOs. These could be community volunteers like Vaani community volunteers who've been helping on grievance redressal, for example, right? So the common term we've been using across the network is landscape stewards, right? Somebody who works with the community, gets them to understand the landscape, understand the concerns, and do this kind of a planning. So Commons Connect internally uses all of these different data sets. It provides a decision support kind of a mechanism. It also provides a social accountability mechanism, that the plans that the communities are building, they are getting archived, they're available on the web and so on. So it builds a digital trail through which you can review, right, which demands were put up last year, which demands were again put up this year, and which were allocated, not allocated. So it enables that kind of a tracking. And the data also enables everyone to come up with a shared understanding. So now with Commons Connect, the key person using it is this landscape steward, right? And they do a lot of work, as in it's not straightforward. First of all, to go through trainings to understand these data layers, and then to learn about community mobilization processes, how to get communities together, how to build consensus, especially when there are equity issues, caste issues. So their job description is very, very complex. So far, they are largely funded by CSOs through donor funded projects. But that also is a limitation, because once the project ends, then stipends to these stewards also stop.
Right.
And you need those stewards to be there in the community, so that it's irrespective of whether they're using Commons Connect or not. But the point is that there is need for this kind of a role. Somebody who's there in the community day in, day out, monitoring, putting in requests for maintenance of water bodies, different structures, potentially even helping with data collection. So a dream vision is that can all of this be sustained as a platform cooperative, which means that if we can figure out revenue channels, these revenue channels can be through donors, for example, who want to support landscape stewards, or it could be through agencies that want to enable data collection of some sort, and they might be willing to pay. So there might be a stack of revenue channels for landscape stewards, and a fraction of that can potentially pay for the technology which is driving all of. That's kind of the vision, that it is these change agents, right? These local change makers who we somehow need to have a sustainable livelihood, so that they can be in their community, they can stay in their areas, and they can play a role, right, in catalyzing the community and having the whole thing move in a more sustainable direction. Everything else is in kind of service of that.
Let's go back to the holding of the network, because what you've done with the creation of CoreStack is not just you and a handful of organizations. You kind of created this entire network of organizations. At the moment, what is holding all of that together? I mean, we work together.
Yeah.
And we work together a little bit, of course, when we raise joint grants, but also outside of that. So what keeps that community and sustains that ecosystem?
It's really about everyone having a shared belief and overall desire to use data sets in a meaningful manner. So we have basically three types of organizations in the network, right? But we have implementation partners who are working on the ground. They are primarily using the tools, in turn providing a lot of feedback on how to improve the usability, bug reporting, new features, new use cases that should be added. Then we have environmental research organizations like Well Labs, who play a key role in validating whether the methodology that's being implemented, is that correct, does it make sense, is the right modeling being done in all of this. And the third set are more open source kind of product designers and software engineers who are needed to build all of these things together, along with other computer science skills like geospatial data processing and so on. In that sense, it's a loose network, but we're all kind of unified in terms of giving feedback, learning from each other, using tools, data around natural resource management. So we do monthly community of practice calls, for example, where everyone comes together and we discuss about new use cases. We plan agendas in advance, but it's around getting feedback on new features that have been released, or partners sharing experiences with each other of how they're using the tools, how they're connecting with governments, and so on.
What's been some of the exciting stuff that's come up on one of these calls?
So, for example, the call last week was led by PRADAN. PRADAN has been working in Jharkhand on planning for natural water resources largely, and interfacing very closely with NREGA for getting these things funded. So the government actually has set up a platform called Yuktdhara, which also, like the CoreStack, it brings a lot of different geospatial datasets together. And it's used, one, for recommending what kind of areas are suitable for what kind of interventions, and then also for validating whether some proposed interventions are being proposed in areas that are suitable for those interventions. Yuktdhara doesn't have a community-facing planning system, which is what Commons Connect is basically doing, right? Commons Connect enables the CRPs and stewards to engage with the local communities, discuss with them, and key in some of these demands. So PRADAN actually helped build this interface that the demands coming in through Commons Connect, they helped build out a CSV export format so that the demands can be exported and these can be directly uploaded into Yuktdhara. So that is a big deal because it's demonstrating how a scheme which is operating across the country and which is going to be using this Yuktdhara platform can at any place use a community-facing process and a tool like Commons Connect. So that was pretty exciting. Pradhan talked about not just the experiences with the tools, but also the process that they followed, where they informed the government departments in advance. They showed them the outputs of the app, got approvals to use it in this manner, and they also engaged multiple line department functionaries.
One of the things we've struggled with, and you know that we've been working with our team and across our set of tools on what we call diagnose design well. Should one start with telling people, start with the basic, but then start building to go from just asking for services to even going and defining what services government should be offering?
Yeah.
So how does that ladder happen?
We are literally at like step zero.
At the base of the ladder right now.
Yeah. I mean, there is so much to learn and discover. We've actually just taken a very, I would say, a very conservative kind of an approach, right? That we definitely don't want to push anything down to the community, and also, I mean, that so that it doesn't take away agency. That's of course one key reason, but also because a lot of the data sets they can have mistakes,
right?
Or maybe even if not mistakes, but the resolution of those data sets may not be suitable for
the
all
scale
types
of decision making that's required.
So maybe like the digital elevation maps at a 30-meter resolution, they might be more suitable for cement check dams in like stream order 2, but not for figuring out whether gully plugs in some stream order, which is not even actually visible on the app, right? If it's suitable for that. So the approach that we've kind of taken as step 0 is basically partly to put a lot of the data sets out there so that it can trigger a conversation. Yeah. And that helps because even though communities, let's say some areas which are facing groundwater stress, so they know it much better than us, right? They don't need to be told that your area is groundwater stress. They're seeing it day in, day out.
That's their life.
That's their life. But maybe a collective conversation around how to conserve, how to be more principled in groundwater usage and crop selection, and maybe that conversation hasn't happened. And that's the facilitation that landscape stewards can enable. So the data helps them do that, right?
So basically, your imagination is that sort of the data and the tools are not necessarily to impose saying, here's a form for you to fill. It's not a glorified form, but it's really a way to facilitate conversations because you're now looking and referencing a common source of truth, if you want to call it that. And then you're saying, even if the discussion is that's all rubbish, even that's better than not having that to talk about.
Exactly. So data sets to initiate a discussion, that's one thing that is working well. The other is that even when it comes to planning, right? So what sort of layers should be considered when you're thinking about a structure? So you should consider whether it's on a drainage line or not. You should consider whether it's in a higher stream order, lower stream order or not. You should consider the soil type. You should consider experiences so that you can understand the underlying aquifer in that area, right? How are wells behaving in the area and so on. So some data is available, which is shown. Some data the communities know from experience. So on Commons Connect, we don't go all the way to say that this rule is what you should try to obey. But just that these are things that you should consider. And then, whatever you think is suitable, you recommend that. Anyway, there is going to be a site review by a technical engineer, right? And they will eventually take a call. But as long as you've given those consideration to some of these things and you've put in your reasons as to why such a structure is needed in the area, at least get it to that point.
Yeah. I think one of the ways to rebut the critique that, hey, which I myself have said, like, I mean, none of these are perfect algorithms yet. Your resolutions aren't perfect. CLART isn't perfect. CLART is one of the tools that I use for site suitability tools. They're not perfect, but once you put the processes in place, you can always go and update the data set and the algorithm to make it better over time. But the hard stuff is really getting all of those CRPs in place, getting them embedded in government agencies, so on and so forth. So that's where the big leaps are. You've put all of that big infrastructure in place. And then you can tweak.
Exactly.
You can always get better data sets, better land use, land cover, better,
Exactly. That's exactly the point, right? That these processes are what need to be put in place. Data can facilitate them and it can be improved, but those processes are to improve effectiveness of planning and equity in planning.
Right.
That's where it helps.
If you find this episode to be valuable, please like the video and check out our other show on this channel, The Well Labs Show. And don't forget to subscribe to the Well Labs YouTube channel. So, is there something over these last 15 years that you would say that really got you excited, or an aha moment in the sense of, I hadn't realized that and now I get it?
So 15 years is including all our learning through Vaani and then topped up with some of CoreStack kind of work. But I mean, the way I started viewing technology is basically that it's a tool to change power dynamic. It all depends on in whose hand the tools are and what they can do to alter the broader system in which they're embedded. So you can think of any of these things, like we were talking earlier about grievance redressal. So community members are embedded in this system where in a village, maybe they're from a marginalized group, maybe not, but there's a panchayat, there's those kind of dynamics. Then there's a administrator, right? But like a field functionary who's kind of responsible for some decision making. Then there's a block officer who has more discretionary power and maybe other incentives, right? When you introduce technology like the Gramani tools, right, it's really putting more power in the hands of the community. It is giving them a mouthpiece effectively to talk about what's working, what's not working. And similarly, right, even with Commons Connect, right, that's really when you are building these plans. And the plans are, you're attaching some kind of a suitability score behind each structure that has been proposed, or whatever benefits it's likely to lead to. It becomes harder and harder to just exercise discretionary power by somebody who has that power. So, what my learning really has been is that we should view technology, data, all of these things from the lens of power.
So whose agency are you creating? Whose hand are you strengthening? Because there is a tendency for technology people to, or techies, to think of technology as being somehow a power agnostic, politics agnostic. And your primary thesis is that the way you design technology can really make a difference in terms of who are winners and losers.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And I think this view that tech is something neutral, right, is like a escapist route, I think. Is you just not thought hard enough. That's all that it means.
Yeah, and lots of people, unlike you, of the techies who design these, have often not gone and spoken to the beneficiaries of their schemes and not spent enough time in rural India. And so in your case, just that long history of having talked to some of these functionaries, talked to some of the beneficiaries, really kind of plays into how you've designed technology.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, it puts that lens is there. Yeah.
So one of the things that your data showed was the inequities in MGNREGA itself. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And then the discomfort, because on one hand, you want to work with government and you want them to adopt these tools like Commons Connect. On the other hand, you're fundamentally challenging, and that's why you're doing it. You're fundamentally challenging some of the, the core tenets of some of these flagship programs. So walk us through that a little bit.
Actually, the government is the easiest one in that sense to have this bipolar attitude with, because all of these schemes actually constitutionally, NREGA is meant to be demand driven, right? Not top down. It goes to the Gram Sabha and these things are then passed and so on. The way the implementation ends up happening, however, ends up it becoming top down, and it also leads to works being done in inappropriate places and corruption and so on, right? So it's the implementation. The law actually says the exact opposite. Same, NREGA itself has proactive benefits for marginalized caste groups. And this is also what we found over all these years with Vaani, that we were building a platform that was really enabling communities to challenge the government, administrators, and so on. But never once, I think, did we face a situation where we were kind of dismissed. We sometimes like to think of government as one monolith unit, but actually it's like many different people, right?
That's true.
And I think especially many senior bureaucrats that we've interacted with, they generally want
the schemes to be better.
Yeah. Implementation to be better. So we found them to be very open to listening to these things.
And when you're able to take the data and show that it's actually not exactly reaching the intended beneficiaries, they are able to act on it.
Right. Yeah. Whether they're able to act on it might depend on so many other things, but at least they listen. If they can take action, great.
You can see kind of how your journey from Vaani to hear about people's problems and then to CoreStack to kind of design a suite of tools that would actually, address those problems. Now it's kind of all clear to me. So you've described this entire set of tools, data layers, and so on as digital public infrastructure. And the DPI conversation in India has been, of course, around the financial stack of Aadhaar and UPI and all of that. What are the elements of CoreStack that make it infrastructure?
We've started claiming that we are a digital public infrastructure. But you're right that the word DPI is otherwise used. So the word public in the kind of DPI is typically the state. The way we are using the word public in DPI is the public is the society, the citizens in that sense, right? So we are saying that this is an infrastructure for the public, and ideally it should be owned by the public. We have many miles to go before something like that kind of happens, like this whole platform cooperative kind of model I was talking about.
But we are all working together as a community on this one.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely, So that's the other part of this publicness, right? That being built through public consultations and
in an open architecture with anybody can join. I mean, there's no like barriers to entry or anything.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the idea that the public in the CoreStack use of the term DPI means the community.
But I guess the question I was asking is like, if I wanted to submit a data set to the CoreStack, are there like clear protocols? And you said eventually forms and stuff. Right now you're doing it sort of at the back end, but eventually there'll be a set of protocols of what is a high quality layer and data quality standards and metadata standards and a way to submit. But then if I want to now develop my own set of tools on the CoreStack set of layers, there will be eventually protocols around that. They're all API ready at the moment already.
Yeah. So the data sets, you can download them and you can also access computed statistics through APIs. So all that is already out there. And some people have tried to also build different types of tools using these as building blocks. So that's definitely there. We still have to build out those kind of pieces where people can submit their own data sets and then take them through pipelines and things like that. We've kind of not done that so far, largely because we were kind of more use case driven.
Right.
That to enable some of these use cases.
I mean, you have to prove the concept first. But once you've kind of proved a few, then you want to open up the architecture to another.
Correct. So so hopefully we'll get there soon. Right now, the view that's kind of exposed is either you can use tools or you can use APIs.
Right.
But we've got to build that part where you can actually look at what is the infrastructure, what are the underlying data sets, and then just access them or push your own, run it through some compute pipelines. So those, we will get to that.
Yeah. So then I guess the question is, if this entire thing was successful beyond your wildest imagination, what would success look like? I mean, what's your ambition for, this is what is possible that isn't possible today? Like, let's say for the entire CoreStack community, it becomes a thriving ecosystem 10 years from now. Like, paint me that picture.
Actually, I'll have to think. The community itself being able to understand the data, speak to it, use it to understand their landscape and plan better, improve collectivization, and the tools can enable, right, whatever needs to be done for that. So the thing is that when it comes to all these environmental issues, right, there's of course a lot of politics, right? But at the end of the day, the way to solve it is kind of obvious, right? That it needs people to be aware of their environment. What are they consuming? What are they giving back? And look at different units and understand the sustainability of those units, and whatever is needed to make that sustainable, have some of those channels flowing. So these channels could be finance as one channel, knowledge is another channel, access to programs and schemes, mentorship, those are other channels. So I mean, that's the kind of a infrastructure that you ultimately want people to have. So
And people being individual community resource persons or CRPs, like what you call landscape stewards, and NGO and local government, state government, I mean, block development officers, all of those people.
All of those, and the communities themselves, right? I mean, the people in all of these landscapes, them also being able to network with each other, improve their understanding. Because it's not that the steward is going to change anything on their own, right? Ultimately, I mean, these are collective decision-making problems that need to be solved, which needs the people to actually understand the common pool resources that they're accessing and to build norms and everything around some of these things. So the steward is more like a channel to build up that kind of understanding, but ultimately needs the community to come on board.
I mean, the more layers that you can add, and then you start pulling from other existing databases. You build tools that actually pull data from multiple databases for different purposes. That's the imagination eventually. So, we've sort of reached the end of our discussion, and it's been really, really enlightening for me. This podcast, we probably have all kinds of water professionals listening. Some are young researchers, some are people in NGOs, people in donor agencies, so on. So what's your call to action for each of these? So suppose I was a young researcher or somebody in a startup. What would be your call to action to each of these people?
I think it's about doing good science and taking it to deployment. That is, I think, a gap in many cases, that especially in academia, where people do data collection and modeling.
But it ends with a paper.
It ends with a paper.
Yeah.
So, but what you actually need is that the code is published, the models are published, or is put in some kind of a form that then gets a longer life, and it can be incorporated into tools like Commons Connect, CoreStack, and so on, so that it leads to, I mean, people are able to actually take action based on that. So that's definitely something that anyone getting into academia should be thinking about.
So everybody should sort of think of their piece as a drop which gets added into this common ocean, which is this, where if you have a data set, submit your data set. If you have a bit of code that is a tool, submit that, as well, so that it starts becoming.
Yeah, even if those submissions do happen, the crux is that, I mean, you need to do a lot more to actually make it deployable.
Right.
So we need to go through that process, right? So just by putting something on GitHub doesn't make it an open source project. No. You've got to build a whole community.
So be part of the community, engage with the community. Kind of basically see your piece through to the end.
Through to the end.
And not like I published, it's done.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And discover problems on the ground by talking to people.
That is just, one of the major pieces that we learned right from the beginning is the reason you even got this far is because you traveled and listened to all these people, and you didn't sit in the ivory tower and develop some set of protocols. And that's what makes sort of both Vaani and CoreStack so unique and special.
Right. Yeah. I mean, no, definitely.
Adi, thanks so much for listening to us. It's been an amazing inspiration, and I hope many people listen to this and become part of the CoreStack community and engage with your work and get inspired.
No, thank you so much, Veena, for having me. I had a great fun time talking about all this.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's it for this episode of the Water Data Podcast. Thank you for listening till the end. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to the Well Labs YouTube channel and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. You can also find the Water Data Podcast on all podcast platforms. Until then, stay curious and stay connected.